Today, we are accustomed to seeing people of all shapes and sizes whenever we leave our house. Innovations in transportation have allowed us to spread our genetic makeup further, leading to much greater body diversity in any given area. But it wasn't too long ago when most people were confined to seeing only a tiny fraction of the vast human experience. In your daily life, you would have encountered only people living, eating, and working much the same way you were yourself. As a result, everyone you saw was essentially physically similar. This was certainly the experience in rural Leicester at the turn of the 19th century. And when a man came along who shattered the expectations of what a middle-class Brit ought to look like, it was genuinely shocking. It was so shocking, in fact, that the man in question was able to gain considerable wealth and fame by simply allowing people to look at him. Daniel Lambert was born on March 13, 1770, in the parish of St. Margaret, Leicester. His father, once a huntsman for the Earl of Stamford, was now the local jailer. While young Daniel did have an aunt and uncle on his father's side who were quite large, his mother and father were of average size, as were his siblings, a brother who died young, and two sisters who lived until adulthood. The young Lambert was raised in a sporting family and grew up strong and healthy, with a love for hunting, horse racing, fishing, and dogs. He was a terrific swimmer to the extent that he was entrusted by local parents to teach the other children how to swim. Long before he was renowned for his impressive weight, Daniel was admired for his sheer strength and bravery. It's said that as a teenager he wandered across a performance of dancing bears while walking with one of his favorite dogs. The dog lunged at one of the bears, and the showman, irritated by the disruption, unmuzzled the great beast so it might do as it wished with the dog. Lambert beat the bear back with a pole and knocked it off its feet with a mighty wallop of his bare hand, frightening the beasts and the showman so much that they did not return to the area for several years. At 14, he was sent to Birmingham to train at the die-casting manufacturer Taylor & Co. The business was destroyed in the priestly riots of 1791, and unable to find other work, Daniel was sent back to Leicester. At 21, he took over his father's job as the local jailkeeper. For the first time in his life, Daniel was confined to a smaller indoor area, no longer spending his days strolling the fields, riding horses, or swimming in the local river. He began to put on weight. By 1793, he weighed 448 pounds, but remained remarkably strong and agile. He was known to still lift up to 560 pounds of timber and could carry 2 men on his back as he swam. His sheer size made him something of a local legend, and many visitors to Leicester stopped by the jail or the Lambert house to look at him. Despite his intimidating appearance, Lambert was a kind man. He took remarkable care of the prisoners in his charge, and it's claimed most left the jail with teary and heartfelt thanks to their jailer. But in the early 1800s, the prison was closed, and the prisoners were put to work in local manufacturing businesses instead. As a parting gift for his family's years of dedicated service, Daniel was awarded an annual annuity and a certificate of recognition. By this time, his weight was moving steadily closer to 600 pounds, and he found himself the object of fascination each time he left his home. And though the annuity provided some comfort, it was less than his annual income as a jailkeeper. Daniel had never particularly enjoyed the attention his weight brought, but he saw that it may provide him an opportunity to supplement his finances. In the spring of 1806, he commissioned the construction of a custom carriage large enough to accommodate his now 700-pound frame and moved to London, Once in the city, he settled into an apartment in Piccadilly and took an advertisement in the Times that read, "Exhibition. Mr. Daniel Lambert of Leicester, the greatest curiosity in the world, who, at the age of 36, weighs upwards of 50 stone, £14 to the stone. Mr. Lambert will see company at his house, number 53 Piccadilly, opposite St James's Church, from 12 to 5 o'clock. Admittance, £1. And so for 5 hours each day, Daniel Lambert entertained visitors for £1 apiece. This was no sideshow act or roadside gimmick. He simply sat and visited with his curious patrons. Those drawn in by their curiosity were astounded at his size, but they returned for his personality. Daniel was a sparkling conversationalist who could spend hours discussing dog breeds, hunting, or other outdoor interests. One banker in the city came so often to visit Daniel that he joked he had paid for at least a pound of the man's enormous weight. A group of 14 came all the way from Guernsey, crossing the English Channel for the sole purpose of seeing Lambert after hearing about him from their neighbours, and a Frenchman tried to convince him to accompany him back to France for a tour of the continent. One of Daniel's favourite visitors was Count Józef Borowski, the famous Polish-born dwarf and favourite of the European royals. Like Daniel, Borowski had submitted to being an object of curiosity out of financial necessity, and the two men found a strange kinship in their physical extremes. Lambert was also granted an audience with King George III, though the details of that meeting are, sadly, lost to history. Had Daniel Lambert lived 100 years later, his size would have been an object of mockery and ridicule. But in the early 19th century, Daniel was treated as a marvel, and many people from London's middle and upper classes sought out his companionship, if only to be included in the sphere of his endearing personality. Along with his fashionable visitors, Lambert also attracted the attention of London's medical professionals, eager to examine the heaviest man in recorded history. An article in the Medical and Physical Journal confirmed that Daniel weighed 50 stones and measured 5 feet 11 inches tall. He was described as mentally alert, well-read, and with an excellent memory. He appeared to be in excellent health and told physicians he could walk at least a quarter of a mile without difficulty. Doctors found tumefaction, now known as edema or fluid retention, in his feet, legs and thighs, but reported that his normal speaking voice showed no signs of pressure on the lungs. Lambert claimed to eat normal quantities of ordinary food and said he had drank nothing but water for the past decade. Though Daniel enjoyed a certain degree of respect and admiration, not all his visitors were polite. He disdained the constant questions about the size and cost of his clothing, finding the inquiry overly personal and rude. One man claimed that he had a right to know about it since his £1 entrance fee was paying for said clothing. A frustrated Daniel replied, "Sir, if I knew what part of my next coat your £1 would pay for, I can assure you I would cut out the piece." He had little patience for rudeness and was known to turn visitors out as quickly as they entered if they were uncivil. After 5 months of entertaining up to 400 visitors daily, Daniel's pockets were bulging with coin and he was ready to return home. Back in Leicester, he resumed his lifelong passions, now as a very wealthy man. He was a skilled dog breeder, and the list to purchase a sporting dog from Lambert's line was long. He was now a bona fide celebrity, and even an outing to attend the races earned a mention in the local news, which read, "Among the distinguished characters upon the turf, we are glad to see our old friend Mr. Daniel Lambert, in apparent high health and spirits." Though Daniel had grown dispirited in London, the public was more eager than ever to see the man of mythical proportions. So after an enjoyable reprieve, he began touring around the country, attracting massive crowds wherever he appeared. By 1809, Daniel weighed 739 pounds and could no longer climb stairs. Many would later theorize that his summer tour that year would be his last, a final push that would earn him enough money to retire for good. He arranged for his tour to conclude in Stamford, Lincolnshire, so that he might view the Stamford races before returning home. He arrived on June the 20th, taking a ground floor room at the Wagon and Horses Inn on High Street. He took a meeting with a printer from the Stamford Mercury to arrange an order of advertisements and handbills and went to bed early. The following day, he rose at his usual time in apparently good health, but began to complain of shortness of breath while shaving. Minutes later, the mountain of a man collapsed to the floor and died. He was 39 years old. Daniel Lambert's death was undeniably sad, but those who attended him had more pressing worries. The massive corpse began to putrefy quickly in the warm summer air, and there was no chance of moving him to Leicester. A window and part of a wall were disassembled so Daniel's body could be removed from the inn, and a massive elm coffin measuring over 4 feet wide was made for his burial. The carriage-sized box made of 156 square feet of wood was constructed on wheels. On June the 23rd, 20 men rolled the casket from town to a burial ground in St. Martin's, and it's claimed it took nearly half an hour to lower the box down a gradual slope into the grave. Though buried some 30 miles from his home, Daniel Lambert was not given a pauper's funeral. Dozens of people gathered at the churchyard, many of whom had expected to see Daniel alive at the final stop of his tour. His tombstone, paid for by his many friends and admirers, read, "In remembrance of that prodigy in nature, Daniel Lambert, a native of Leicester, who was possessed of an exalted and convivial mind and in personal greatness, had no competitor. He measured 3 foot 1 inch round the leg, 9 feet 4 inches around the body, and weighed 52 stone 11 pounds. He departed this life on June the 21st, 1809, aged 39 years. As a testimony of respect, this stone is erected by his friends in Leicester." Daniel Lambert was not easily forgotten. Months after his death, John Draycard released the first full biography of his life. Pubs across England were renamed in his honour, and his clothes and possessions were sold at auction. The term Daniel Lambert became part of common English speech as a reference to any overweight man and eventually to anything exceptionally large. A life-size waxwork of Lambert was shown in the United States and later bought by showman P.T. Barnum for display at his New York museum. Barnum visited Stamford several times to use Lambert's belongings in publicity stunts. During one visit, the 40-inch tall Charles Sherwood Stratton, better known as General Tom Thumb, was tied up inside one of Lambert's stockings. In 1866, Barnum brought 4 dwarfs to Stamford to pass through the knee of Daniel Lambert's breeches side by side. It remains unknown what may have caused his extreme weight, since no autopsy was conducted before his burial, and there are no records that indicate he had exhibited symptoms common to endocrine or genetic disorders. Daniel Lambert's title as world's heaviest man didn't outlive him for long. American Mills Darden topped the scales at over 1,000 pounds in the 1850s. Today, the title is still held by John Brower Minnock, a taxi driver from Seattle, Washington, who was recorded as weighing 1,400 pounds in 1978. But Daniel certainly remains Leicester's favourite rotund raconteur. A set of his clothes, along with his armchair, walking stick and prayer book, are on permanent display at the Newark Houses Museum. And in Stamford, the local football team is nicknamed the Daniels after their folk hero. To those who knew him or are familiar with his story, Daniel's massive imprint on local history comes not simply from his size, but his pleasant disposition. Thank you for watching. Right then, take care, and I'll see you next time with another story that will make you say, well, I never.